Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is September the 16th, 2024. It has been 3,885 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 208 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, 2 years and 205 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression, and 42 days since Ukraine counter-invaded Russia. Today's podcast covers the events that happened over the weekend. You will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. There is a link in the podcast description, and there are map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south, and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian male bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission: the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. In our assessment, United States military aid to Ukraine will likely end on September the 30th, 2024, beyond already committed deliveries and funding. 2. The lack of a meaningful response by Ukraine's allies to open and unrestricted attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure by Russia has convinced Moscow this is an effective strategy with no political consequences. 3. Russia will maintain its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, continuing Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 4 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. 4. The continued attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have caused critical damage, creating an environment where an accident at one or more of Ukraine's nuclear power plants is possible. 5. The unwillingness of the Biden administration to permit Ukraine to use provided weapons for strikes more than 40 kilometers from the 1991 state border with Russia has forced Ukraine to develop its own deep strike capabilities, proving that escalation threats from Moscow are hollow. 6. The policy of escalation management implemented by the NATO alliance and the United States, and to a small extent Germany, is a complete failure that only encourages Russian acts of aggression against the NATO alliance and Ukraine's allies. 7. The failed policies of the NATO alliance are increasing the probability of a significant international incident, nuclear proliferation, and an expansion of the Russia-Ukraine war into the European continent. 8. Despite Russia's localized counteroffensive, Moscow has no strategic reserve available to mount an effective defense of the Kursk region, continues to suffer unsustainable losses, and has committed almost all of its available conventional forces in Ukraine. 9. We maintain the Kursk counter-invasion is strategically sound. 10. Autocrat Vladimir Putin's order to recapture the Kursk region of Russia by October the 1st is unrealistic and very unlikely. 11. The Russian economy is much weaker than reported. 12. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. Today, we start with the action report summary. From Friday to Sunday, Russia carried out 475 discrete assaults, including 173 on Sunday, indicating that the operational pause that started last week has ended. Through September the 15th, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks dropped to 146. Compared to a week ago, the number of Russian attacks declined by 27%. According to the Russian Officers Killed in Ukraine project, 4,733 officers have been killed in action from February the 24th, 2022 through September the 14th, 2024, about 5 a day. A new milestone was reached, with Russia losing 100 colonels. Colonel Alexei Lyapin, head of the regional Spetsnaz detachment of the Border Guard Directorate in the Belgorod and Voronezh regions, became number 100. He was killed in combat on June the 17th, and his death was verified on September the 14th. The table for Russian versus Ukrainian equipment losses was updated using information from the Oryx database through September the 15th, 2024. Russia has lost over 10,000 armored vehicles since the expansion of the Russia-Ukraine war. There's too much information to cover in the podcast, but we include the details in today's situation report. There's more information in the podcast description on how you can become a subscriber. Let's go into the details of what happened on the battlefield. This would be a good time to open up the war map on a second device and find the city of Sumy, that's in northeastern Ukraine. There is a link to the map in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. We begin in the Kursk region of Russia, in the Glushkovsky area of operation, or AO, where Ukrainian forces advanced in two directions. Satellite images from September the 15th clearly showed the Ukrainian breach of Russian defenses at Novy Put and the route taken to cross the first echelon of the Prigozhin line. Today's situation report contains many of the satellite images I will mention. Ukrainian forces went west and north in two columns from Novy Put, entering Obuchovka, that's the one in the Glushkovsky district, and captured the village. The advance continued into Veselaya from the west using a causeway and from the south on the main road. Videos confirmed the presence of Ukrainian forces in Obuchovka and Veselaya. On Sunday, the Ukrainian Air Force bombed the Veselovsky kindergarten building, which had reportedly been occupied by retreating Russian troops. Fighting continues in the settlement. We link to the video showing the airstrike. Ukrainian forces also advanced east on the railroad grade, up to 10 kilometers from Novy Put in the direction of Sadove Tovarishchestvo Glushkovo. During the advance, a platoon of Ukrainian armor was attacked by Russian forces northeast of Medvezhye. Intelligence indicates that Ukrainian forces took control of Oddel Komsomolskaya, Obod, and Medvezhye, and Politotdelsky was moved into the grey area. Northwest of Yelizavetovka, a Ukrainian drone destroyed a Russian Msta-S self-propelled howitzer. Russian sources claimed that Ukrainian troops reached Sadove Tovarishchestvo Glushkovo, which was likely caused by the fog of war. Satellite images suggested that a drone or artillery round struck a large warehouse, and there were indications of artillery strikes on the outskirts of the village. The images are not conclusive, as an uncontained brush fire has been burning through the area since September the 10th. The smoke from the wildfire, combined with Ukrainian forces advancing on the railroad grade and the use of ranged weapons, likely caused panic in the information space. A geolocated video from a Russian source confirmed the same river bridge at Zvanaya can no longer be used. Satellite images showed that the engineered bridge to the west, which was destroyed on September the 7th, has been restored. North of Glushkovo, Russian combat engineers built another pontoon bridge over the same river. Last week I told you about how the owner of the Svetofor convenience store in Glushkovo complained online about it being looted. A geolocated video showed that Russian troops took everything from the shop and then set the building on fire. The same video showed that the nearby Peterochka grocery store had been untouched. In the Korenevo AO, Russian sources have not provided any evidence to back up their claims, now a week old, that a dozen villages and settlements have been captured. The Russian Ministry of Defense, or Armored, claimed that fighting has moved to the east, which was unsupported by the semi-reliable Russian bloggers. None of the Russian sources denied Armord's claims. Instead, they ignored their reports and focused on other areas. 7 days after Russia's counteroffensive started, the only proof shared by Russian sources has been in Snagost, west of Lyubimovka, in Krasnooktyabrsky, and at the 344th kilometer place train station. In our assessment, had Russian forces been as successful as reported by the Kremlin, videos showing flag raisings would have been shared by now. The analyst team pored over the September 15th Sentinel-2LA images and could find no evidence of continued or significant fighting in Gordeevka, Viktorovka, Внезапная, Byakhovo or Apanasovka. South of Komarovka, the Ukrainian Air Force bombed a Russian position at the farm on the railroad grade. East of the former Soviet-era hamlet of 10th October, a Russian military pickup truck was destroyed by a drone. We link to both videos. Armored reported fighting, quote, in the direction of Viktorovka, which would be impossible if fighting is happening in Nikolaevo-Daryino, as the Kremlin claimed. NASA information for Resource Management Systems, or FIRMS, did show significant activity in the areas of Daryino, Nikolaevo-Daryino, and Pokrovsky. The VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, destroyed a 2S-1 Gvozdika self-propelled howitzer in Daryino. Artillery pieces are normally kept at least 5 kilometers from the forwardmost line of friendly troops, and the destruction of the 2S-1 undercuts Moscow's claims of fighting in Daryino and the earlier claimed capture of Pokrovsky. Russian attempts to advance into Lyubimovka with a company of armor supported by a company of light infantry failed, with at least 7 armored vehicles destroyed and dozens of losses. Elite Russian air assault forces spearheaded the attack and got the Hostomel treatment. There were conflicting reports over control of Obuchovka, that's the one near Korenevo, and whether fighting was ongoing or not. Satellite images showed significant damage to the buildings in the eastern half of the settlement, and Armored reported that the settlement was shelled, indicating it is still under Ukrainian control. Fighting continued north of Lgovka and near Kremyanaya, with no change in the situation. In the Lgov operational direction, Ukrainian drones struck multiple targets across Sheptuchovka. The strikes confirmed territorial control, and we moved the settlement out of the grey area. The number of attacks suggests that Ukrainian forces may be setting conditions for a future assault. We reduced the grey area north of Sheptuchovka despite a recent VKS airstrike on Ukrainian positions, as there are no viable ground lines of communication to support a permanent presence in that area. Satellite images showed significant damage in Kireevka, although no fighting was reported in the area. In the Bolshoe Soldatskoe, satellite images also showed indications of significant fighting in Berdin and Razgrebli, despite no claims of fighting in the area. A very large crater on the western edge of Bolshoe Soldatskoe was also found. It is unclear what exploded and which combatant caused it. The new burn scars scattered within Bolshoe Soldatskoe suggest ammunition was destroyed. We link to the satellite images on Twitter, also known as X. In the Belitsa, Russian forces advanced from Ulanak into Barki, occupying at least the western half of the village. Satellite images did not show signs of house-to-house combat in the eastern part of Barki. In amazing news, Russian forces did a flag ceremony in a location that couldn't be geolocated, and made multiple videos showing how they captured the western part of the settlement. I guess the Russian troops near Korenevo forgot their flags. Here is my theater-wide update for the Kursk region. While speaking with reporter Farid Zakaria, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, said that the Russian counteroffensive in the Kursk Oblast had not achieved any significant breakthroughs. Quote, "We know of about 40,000 people deployed there. They wanted quick breakthroughs. They are doing it, but we have yet to see any serious successes." Ukrainian soldiers are holding on heroically and doing everything it takes for our other military and political steps. Zelensky added that since Ukraine started its counter-invasion on August the 6th, in some areas in the Pokrovsk area of operation, the Russian artillery advantage fell from 1 to 12 to 1 to 2.5. On Friday, Pentagon spokesman General Patrick Ryder called the results of the Russian counteroffensive, quote, marginal, and said Washington was monitoring the situation. Ukrainian military spokesman Vadim Mysnik said that Russia has 45,000 troops deployed in the Kursk Oblast in an attempt to stop the Ukrainian counter-invasion. Over the weekend, Ukraine's commander-in-chief, General Alexander Syrsky, met with members of the Ukrainian 225th Brigade in an undisclosed location near the border of the Kursk Oblast. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine has made a public appeal to the International Committee of the Red Cross and the United Nations, quote, to join the humanitarian response measures in occupied Kursk Oblast. The letter said that Ukrainian administration, quote, steadfastly adheres to its international obligations in the field of international humanitarian law, in particular regarding the protection of the civilian population during hostilities, adding that the ICRC is the, quote, guarantor of international humanitarian law. The National Resistance Center reported that Russian citizens living under occupation are sharing information on the location of Chechen Ahmad forces. Chechen troops have rarely been effective in frontline combat and are more commonly used as rear echelon security forces and blocking troops. They view committing war crimes as an equal opportunity experience, with documented incidents against Ukrainians, prisoners of war, Russians, Russian troops, and private military company mercenaries. Because of their conduct, they are not very popular among Ukrainians, Russians, traffic lights, windows, birds. After weeks of denials that Chechen Ahmad forces abandoned their positions and were captured, Major General Aptia Laudinov said that captured Chechen soldiers have, quote, strayed from the sacred path and are no longer considered Chechens. Alaudinov said they will not be exchanged under any circumstance. He called surrender a, quote, disgrace that can, quote, only be cleansed by blood. Did you know that aspiring dentist and warlord Colonel General Ramzan Dundon Kadyrov has never been to Ukraine? I guess Chechen leaders lead by example, from a distance.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
It's time to talk about my home, Ukraine. Beginning in the Kharkiv Oblast, in the Liptsy-Vovchansk, the only significant fighting reported was in Vovchansk. New intelligence showed that Russia's control northeast of Tykhe has been reduced, and the map was updated. In the Kupiansk, Russian forces reported that Ukrainian forces retook the area by the school in Sinkivka after a Russian soldier did a flag raising for a Kremlin picture report in the same area on August the 29th. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, or GSAFU, reported fighting continued in the area of Petropavlivka. Russian forces expanded their area of control west of Pischane and carried out over 20 attacks attempting to advance toward Glushkivka, Kolesnikivka, and Krugliakivka. Near Berestove, Ukrainian forces continue to repulse assaults from occupied Novoselivsk. In the Luhansk Oblast, west of occupied Svatove, GSAFU reported fighting in the area of occupied Kovalivka, east of Tverdokhlibove, and a failed Russian assault in the direction of Druzhelubivka. West of Kremenna, Russian forces ended their operational pause, carrying out attacks in and south of Makiyivka and east of Nevske, Novosadove, and Terny. None of the attempts to advance were successful. Moving on to the Donbass, where we start in the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. Beginning in the Siverskoe, Russian forces restarted significant operations, attacking east and southeast of Bilogorivka, in western Zolotarivka, and south of Ivanodarivka and Vyimka. In the Konstantinivka, the operational tempo slowed, with Russian forces making marginal gains northwest of Kalinivka and fighting continuing on the western edges of the canal district of Chasiv Yar. Russian attempts to advance in the forests west of Ivanivske and near Kurdyumivka were unsuccessful. In the Toretsk-New York AO, Ukrainian forces held their new defense lines. Fighting continued in eastern Toretsk and southwestern Zalizne. Russian attempts to advance into Nelibivka and retake lost positions in New York were unsuccessful. In southwestern Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces continued their attempts to advance in the Pokrovsk AO, carrying out 36 attacks. Ukrainian forces continued to hold the north flank, repulsing attacks in the direction of Zelena Pole, Vozdvizhenka, Mirolubivka, and Ingrodivka and Novogrodivka. In southwestern Krutyi Yar, a squad of Russian soldiers took a Ukrainian civilian prisoner. Fighting continued in Marinivka and in central Mikhailivka, with no significant change in the situation. In the Kurakhove AO, Russian forces have advanced north of Ukrainsk, with Ukrainian troops at risk of encirclement. Russian troops also made a small advance in southern Halitsinivka. Russian mercenary mail blogger Wargonzo claimed that Zhelanne Persha was captured, while Rybar said the information was unverified. Earlier reports claiming Russian troops had reached northern Hirnek were false. Further south, Russian forces made a small advance in Maximilianivka. After suffering major losses over the weekend, Russian forces in occupied Krasnogorivka entered an operational pause. In the Vuhledar AO, the situation has deteriorated. Intense fighting for control of Pivdeno-Donbaska coal mine No. 3 and Pivdeno-Donbaska coal mine No. 1 was ongoing. Russian forces also advanced from north of Mykilske in the direction of Vuhledar, where Ukrainian troops await the final assault. During the fighting, Russia destroyed the 115-meter-tall air-shaft building at coal mine No. 3. Due to the chatter of the potential Ukrainian authorization to use NATO alliance-provided missiles to strike targets in Russia, the Black Sea Fleet took no chances. Over the weekend, almost all of the vessels left the Russian port of Novorossiysk, which was recently updated to support the fleet, and relocated to Sochi and other ports further south. The change has now moved the fleet out of the range of Storm Shadow and Scalp E cruise missiles and ATACMS. Russia claimed that the move was a planned fleet exercise, but there are no signs of the ships returning after the alleged 24-hour readiness drill. The MV Aya, which was hit by a Russian anti-ship missile on Friday, was able to restore propulsion and arrived at the Romanian port of Constanta. There has been no follow-up by Romania or Ukraine's allies, who appear to be hoping everyone will forget about the incident. Frustrated President Zelensky said that the delay in authorizing long-range strikes into Russia has turned into a self-fulfilling prophecy. United States officials have repeatedly stated that the impact of such attacks would be limited due to the small number of available targets. Zelensky said, quote, "We had some meetings with officials and I said, we have waited too long. Now Russia began to move their jets from 100 kilometers, 150 kilometers to 300 to 500. After that, I will tell you that now we need more permissions." After months of criticism from military commanders, families, soldiers and analysts, General Syrsky announced that basic training for Ukrainian soldiers would be extended. Quote, Instructors play a key role in ensuring the quality of training. As a result, we are focusing heavily on recruiting dedicated instructors with combat experience. We're also exploring the idea of establishing a school of instructors, which will be the primary and sole source of properly trained instructors. We are working to extend the duration of basic combined arms training. A project to address this will be launched in October or November of this year. The U.S. National Security Council advisor Jake Sullivan said that Washington was preparing a major package of assistance for Ukraine that would be announced at the end of September. There was no indication of what major went, with the United States providing roughly $250 million in aid a month since April 2024. The Biden administration has almost $6 billion in unused presidential drawdown authority that will expire on September 30th unless Congress approves an extension. The White House officially requested Mike Johnson add language to a continuing resolution that will keep the U.S. government from shutting down on October 1st. But there is already an impasse, and Washington watchers believe that another budget battle will occur. There are no additional funds for Ukraine beyond the extension request in the 5-month budget resolution, which would keep the government funded until after the national elections. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.